ready to start then. Well, glad you could make it. Glad you're here. As we have Oklahoma weather. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow we'll have a tsunami and then a couple tornadoes, and then it'll be 98 degrees, and then we'll just go from there. I was going to talk about the serpent today, but I think it's going to line up better if we talk about hell today and then talk about the serpent. And so just reminding you, the overall theme is words that matter, and the premise being that words don't just have meaning in and of themselves. It's not just a collection of letters with, that put the sound together and then everybody knows what that meaning is. Like meaning to the words, to sentences, to expressions. It's really cultural, it's really contextual, and there's a lot of construct that goes into it. So, and even the meaning of a word can change over time because of different events. Words carry baggage, some positive, some negative, some neutral. And on top of that, we have translations of languages, some of which aren't even really spoken that way anymore. And then you get 2,000 years of history on top of all that. And so, welcome to the challenge. So we're taking words that have very religious connotations, religious meanings and connotations, and we're trying to unpack those words and what I'm trying to hopefully do in its original setting, and then we walk ourselves inevitably to Jesus, and then we try to make some practical applications. The word hell, that carries the whole baggage, doesn't it? And, Hollywood's kind of put a spin onto that as well. It's also used as kind of a cuss word or like in different ways. Some, like I said, it carries so much what Hollywood's done to it, or at least out there in the popular square, the idea of hell really has either this cartoonish element to it, or, where it has a devil with some spikes and a little pokey thing and some horns. Or it has a very, like Hollywood's try to put a really dark emphasis, as one would expect, with like torture and violence and darkness and screaming. And then our imagination goes everywhere with that. I'm not even sure. Some of you might even twitch a little when you hear the word hell, because, like I said, it's often used in a very, sometimes even cuss word like. And so, what does it even mean? What does it even mean? What did Jesus mean? What did it mean in the story of the Bible? And I think it's quite a fascinating journey that we're going to try to cover here. To start, we have to start in the Old Testament because, and this is important, the stuff that Jesus is saying, not that he didn't have original thought, because he takes just about everything to the next level, but the things he's saying, the way he says it, and the words, the imagery, none of that was floating in nothingness. It had a setting, and most of that setting is what you and I call the Old Testament. So to truly understand what Jesus says, in my humble opinion, one must put that in the backstory. Here's Jesus, born a Jew, into a Jewish family, into a specific moment in time, with a very troubled Jewish history up to then, where Israel was being oppressed by the Romans, at the backstory of the 700 previous years to Jesus. 600 of those were oppressed by foreign pagan nations. And the stuff Jesus says isn't floating in nothingness. Okay? It must be understood through the Old Testament, because Jesus often directly quoted it, indirectly alluded to it. Much of what he said had nuance in the Old Testament. And the same will be true for the word hell. So let's start in Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 7. Jeremiah was at a time in the Jewish history, 587 or so years before Jesus. Israel, the nation had split right after Solomon, and then both the north and the south did not take very long to go deep dive into idolatry. The north eventually is destroyed by the Assyrians, 770 years or so before Jesus, and about 130 years later, give or take, the Babylonians are going to come to the north, to the south. So the north is destroyed by the Assyrians, even though there was prophetic warnings, there was prophets sent. The south repents because they just saw their, brothers and sisters up north basically get a spanking, a very intense. They almost were annihilated from the map, all 10 tribes up north. So they are quite quick to repent through prophets like Isaiah. It didn't take but a couple generations later, we're back at the same mess, and now the Babylonians come. Jeremiah spent about 40 years-ish or so in an active ministry of prophetic warnings and utterances and teaching. About 20 years of that is leading up to the time when the Babylonians come. So 20 years of that is him trying to warn them to repent, to change, to remember their history. But they didn't. And then when the Babylonians finally show up and things go as Jeremiah said it would, then he spends 20 years basically saying, I told you so. And here's what you need to learn from here forward. And so that's kind of the storyline. In Jeremiah chapter 7 is what we call the temple sermon. Jeremiah is basically at the temple in Jerusalem. It would be like on Sunday morning, we have somebody preaching out in the parking lot as people are entering the church. And we would not like the message out in the parking lot because here's parts of it. Let's start in Jeremiah 7, chapter 7, verse 1 to 3. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house and there proclaim this message. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel says. Reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. Okay, that's not a very inviting sermon, especially if you got some visitors showing up at the parking lot. Normally we want to have some friendly greeters over there, at our south doors. And the real sermon really hasn't even started yet. We didn't hire this parking lot preacher. We'd be like, maybe, we don't want to hear from him. We want to hear like everything's going to be great and God loves it and, y'all are amazing, best church ever. Well, that's not what's coming there at the door. And then in verse 4, do not trust deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. Don't you trust the words that you're going to hear inside the temple. Because it's not true. And the temple of the Lord is basically saying, once we walk in this temple, of course God is with us. It says it on the sign. Church of Christ. No, here have been like, temple of Yahweh. So obviously God's with us. Well, verse 5 through 8, if you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other justly. So you can already tell what's wrong, what's happening, that they need to change. If you do not oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and you do not shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I gave your ancestors forever and ever. But look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are worthless. Once again, where are they hearing these deceptive words? Inside the temple, right? From the priest, the intercessors, the teachers of Israel. So what were some of the things they were doing wrong? Obviously, it was the way they were living. Listen, people say whatever they're going to say. Oh, yeah, I believe in God. Sure, I follow Jesus. I'm a great person. I mean, who goes around, let me tell you all my flaws, right? I mean, of course we highlight the positive, and nobody in their right mind would have walked in the temple and be like, yep, we're like pagans here. They walk in and they hear what they want to hear. They hire preachers to tell them what they want to hear. But yet, what are they really doing? They're dealing with each other unjustly. They're oppressing the foreigner. That could be a whole interesting sermon. The fatherless, the widows. In other words, those that were oppressed in that society, the most fragile, weak, needy people of that society. They weren't caring for them. Not only that, they were shedding innocent blood. So I don't know if this is figuratively, literal. And they were just living a life of pagans. How can you claim to follow Yahweh, yet live like you're following another God? Listen, you don't have to have a t-shirt that says, I worship some other God, or have a literal statue of some other God in your basement. Well, we don't have basements here, right? In your closet, and you're over there like, oh, look at me, I worship other gods. You can live in ways that reflect other gods. And so worship isn't just what you do on the weekend at the temple, it's how you live. And they were showing up to church, yet they were living as in the ways of other gods. So I don't know if they went around saying, yep, I love Yahweh, but I also love, the Ashtoreth or Baal or Molech or who knows what. They were living in ways that did not reflect that. So it's important to understand. You might be like, what does this have to do with hell? You will see. It's important to understand what the people of God were doing and how they weren't living as they were supposed to. Here's another reason why I think, or an illustration, why it's important to understand the Old Testament. So in Matthew chapter 21, verse 12 to 13, so Matthew 21 forward is 1 week's time. Up to Matthew 21, we're covering, 2-ish years, almost 3. About 3 years. When we get to Matthew 21, Matthew slows down the story and is going to cover 1 week's time from Matthew 21 to the cross. Okay? So Jesus in Matthew 21 shows up to Jerusalem for the kind of his last Passover there. And remember, it's a triumphal entry. He goes right to Jerusalem. Everybody's clapping, Jesus, Jesus. And he goes to the temple, walks in, starts to overthrow stuff, push people out. People were selling, they were cheating, they were hijacking. They were like bumping up all these prices and really taking advantage of folks, especially the people that were coming from afar. And Jesus says, so he enters the temple courts, drives out all of those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the temples of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. And then he says, it is written, he said to them, my house will be called the house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. He's actually quoting 2 different prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah. The den of robbers is Jeremiah. So now back up a little bit. Jeremiah chapter 7, part of that temple sermon, very intense sermon. You will steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury. You burn incense to Baal and you follow other gods you have not known. And then you come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and you say we are safe to do all these detestable things. Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. You live whatever life you want, and then you have the courage to show up and be like, oh, we love the Lord. I am watching. You have become thieves. You are stealing from each other. You are corrupt. You are worshiping other gods. You have turned my house into an absurd. It's just absurd. It's a place of hypocrisy. It's a place of lying. It's a place of pretending. It's a place of stealing. Because you live a life that follows other gods, and then you show up here and you pretend it's all fine. So that's what Jesus is quoting when he says that, which connects with this sermon, which is important, as we will see. Continuing the sermon, verse 17 through 19, the problem wasn't just one moment in time. You know, like the 60s, I hear it was quite whimsical. You know, people went out and tried took the scenic route through life and tried some fun things along the way. It's more complex than that. In chapter 7, verse 17 to 19, he says, "Do you not see what they are doing in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, the fathers light the fire, and the women knead the dough and make cakes to offer to the Queen of Heaven," pagan god. "They pour out drink offerings to the gods to arouse my anger. But am I the one they are provoking, declares the Lord? Are they not rather harming themselves to their own shame?" It's like the whole family's on board. Like it's a generational problem. The parents are being pagan. They're teaching the children to be pagan who are going to continue this. And they're just living a legacy of provoking God. But are they really harming God? Or are they harming themselves? I need you to hold on to that thought, because this is going to connect with hell. Are they really provoking God? Are they poking God with a short stick? Or are they really harming themselves? And so it's a collective family, generational community. They're all making a mess of things. And in verse 23 to 26, we're hopping along through chapter 7. "But I gave this command, obey me, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Walk in obedience to all I command you, and do all that I command you, that it may go well with you." But they did not listen or pay attention. Instead, they followed the stubborn inclination of their evil hearts. They went backwards and not forward. From the time your ancestors left Egypt until now, day after day, again and again, I sent you my servant the prophets, but they did not listen to me or pay attention. They were stiff-necked and did more evil than their ancestors. It's gotten worse, and they won't listen. And no matter the prophet, how many prophets I send, they won't listen to me. So it's interesting that he correlates the prophet. You listen to the prophet, you're listening to God. They didn't really reject the prophets, they rejected me, because I sent them the prophets. So God has been trying. God has been active. God has been correcting, disciplining. But it gets worse. Their hearts are inclined to evil day after day. Doesn't this start to sound like kind of what we heard there leading up to the flood? Their hearts were inclined to evil all the time. It was a world of Hamas is the word there. It was a world of misery, of pain, of violence, of injury, of abuse. And God is watching. Now, this is not here, he is not speaking to the pagan overlords. He's not speaking to the rest of the world. He's speaking to God's people. He's speaking to the ones that should know better, that have the ability to act differently, that God is directly, intensely involved in nurturing, in like maturing them along. This isn't like children that have been abandoned by their parents and have to fend for themselves. God is actively growing them along, or trying to discipline them, trying to mature them. Yet they're stubborn. They just won't listen. Okay, any thoughts on this before we connect the dots? Why are people so stubborn? They want to do what they want to do. We want to do what we want to do. Like, isn't that like the hashtag of today? Like, whatever makes you happy, or YOLO, or FOMO, or MOMO, or something. I mean, like, it's just do whatever you want to do. And don't anybody dare tell me I can't or I shouldn't.
People do what they want to do because they believe that what they're doing is right.
Yes. Few people wake up in the morning and be like, yep, today I'm going to worship the devil. Most folks, somehow or another, believe they're doing good things and that they are the ones truly capable. Who would know what makes me happy than me? So I go and do whatever I want. And then we phrase it in ways that make it even sound more impressive, like it's my rights, and I can do whatever I want. Nobody's going to tell me anything, and I'm free from government or whatever. Like we phrase it in ways that make it even more valid. Okay. Isn't that... No, hold that thought. Okay, all right. So remember that they were harming themselves. This is important. Their behavior, even though they probably thought they were doing good, was harming themselves. There's Proverbs 14:12. There's a path that seems right, but in the end it leads to death. Folks get on that path because they're stupid. Yet no, because it seems right. When do we find out we made the wrong turn somewhere? When we look around and be like, oh, what fresh hell is this? That's when we know we took the wrong turn. Okay? It's that when I'm facing death. Stop now, you're making me laugh. Wasn't even trying to make it funny. All right. Okay, so here's the coming judgment. Here's where we connect this with hell. Jeremiah 7, still in chapter 7, verse 27, 28. When you tell them all this, they won't listen. So God's already like, I want you to go say this very intense sermon, but nobody's going to listen. Nobody's going to listen. When you call to them, they won't answer. Therefore say to them, this is the nation that has not obeyed the Lord, its God, or responded to correction. Truth has perished. It has vanished from their lips. Once again, I bet we would be quite thrilled to be like, yep, that's what's happening to the world today. But he's speaking to God's people. He's not in Babylon giving the sermon, or in Assyria, or in a bunch of other places where, they all horrible people. He's speaking to Jerusalem. And not even some podunk church in, who knows where. He's speaking to the heart of Israel, Jerusalem. Then chapter 7 still, verse 30, it gets worse. The people of Judah have done evil in my eyes. So it's not just that list early on, declares the Lord. They have set up their detestable idols in the house that bears my name, and they have defiled it. They have built the high places of Topheth and the valley of Ben Hinnom to burn their sons and daughters in the fire. Something I did not command, nor did I ever enter my mind, but beware, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when people will no longer call it Topheth or the valley of Ben Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury the dead in Topheth until there is no more room. Then the carcasses of these people will become food for the birds and the wild animals, and there will be no one to frighten them away. I will bring an end to the sounds of joy and gladness, and to the voices of bride and bridegroom in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, for the land will become desolate. So, here's punishment. The Babylonians are coming, because you won't listen, even with a sermon right outside the door. And plus, Judah's, Jeremiah's going to be at like 20 years of this, and they won't listen. So because you won't listen, and because of detestable things you have done in the last couple hundred years, including I think it was Manasseh, a couple others. Like, they actually put up an altar to the god of Moloch, where you set it, you have this altar, and it looks like this big mouth, and then it has like these hands kind of stuck out, and then you built this fire, and you chunk your children in there. It got that bad. And you think, yeah, that's what horrible human beings do, or God's people. Right? Or God's people. They're still showing up at church. Right? They're still showing up at church. And because of that, and they won't repent, I'm bringing down the Babylonians, and they're going to burn this place to the ground. Just the same fire you set up. You burned your own children. I'm going to let that fire burn in Jerusalem, and my children are going to die. And then the bodies are going to be piled up at that same location, which is a literal place. It's a valley just right outside of Jerusalem called the Valley of Topheth, or Ben Hinnom, which are, I think, interchangeable words. And a significance to that name is going to, whatever Ben Hinnom meant, it's going to mean from there, that time forward, slaughter or place of misery. Because you set that place on fire and burned your children, and so that's where you will burn. And that's literally what happened. Babylon came, killed a bunch of folks, burned Jerusalem to the ground, and put a bunch of piled bodies right there. Piled them right on top of each other in that location. Do you think that place became a memorable place in the history of Israel? Do we not have certain places in our history that battles were fought and whatever, people died, and we have memorials today, the bombing, like we have memorial. It becomes more than just geography, right? It personifies a moment, a feeling, a sentiment, a history, pain, whatever it is, right? It just becomes known for that. And this place was going to be known as a place of misery, a place of slaughter, a place of suffering. Okay, so the Hinnom Valley, or, skip Gehenna for a second. The Hinnom Valley, or Topheth, is then, the meaning is given to, from that moment forward, as Valley of Slaughter, right? And you can read 2 Kings, where it talks about, I think, like I said, Manasseh. Each of these alternate names, they're all connected with the same moment. It culminates on the fact that those children were burned there. Idolatry was it was a place of idolatry, and thus it was a place where, because of that, suffering came upon Jerusalem. And then these bodies are piled here because of choices made back here. So there's a connection. These events are connected to these events. The fire they set here is the fire that burns them here. You with me? The bodies they piled over here unto a foreign god is going to be a foreign god that's going to come and pile their bodies. You see the connection? So one thing is because of the other. And that's just what happened. During the Babylonian invasion, mounds of dead bodies were piled in this very location. All right, once again, why is this significant? Let's move forward about 1,500 or about 500 years or so to Jesus, about 600 years to Jesus. The word hell, translated in your English, hell, is the word in Hebrew, or the word in Greek, Gehenna, which you can start to hear it. So remember the valley of Ben Hinnom, so becomes literally a place of misery, a place of slaughter. Gehenna is a transliteration of that word, and so it becomes Gehenna. Gehinnom, Ben Hinnom. It's not a one-for-one translation. It's taking that sound and transliterating it. And so Jesus is saying Ben Hinnom, but in Greek. Does that make sense? So when he would say Gehenna, Jews would think, oh, yes, yeah, I remember Ben Hinnom. I remember the place of slaughter. I remember our history where we killed babies and then we were dead there. Place of misery. And so that word appears 11 different times in the Gospels, and I think I listed them all there. So what is Jesus meaning when he uses that word? Is he talking about how we're all going to burn in hell one day, or a good amount of folks? Well, kind of. For example, Matthew 23:15. So once again, this is that 1 week's time. Jesus has some very intense interactions with the religious leaders there who are trying to trap him and his words. And in one of those interactions, Matthew 23:15, woe to you. Chapter 23 is all about these woes to the religious leaders. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you. Is he talking about the other side of eternity? When are they being hellish? Right then, in the present. Jesus is stating and then implying, he's stating that whatever evangelistic efforts these religious leaders are making is producing children of hell. Not on the other side of eternity, then. And what he's implying is because they are from hell. But aren't these religious leaders on behalf of Yahweh? One would hope, but they're not. They're children of hell. They're agents of hellish things. And this, once again, this is not the other side of eternity. If you read all those 11, most of them have implications with the here and now. Remember when he talks about if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better to go into maim than to burn in hell. He's not just talking about the other side of eternity, even though there is an allusion to that. He's talking about events you live in a hellish way now. Because remember, what these people did over here to their children brought the very hell that they created upon them. At that same geography, in that same means, they burned their children, they got burned. They piled the bodies, their bodies got piled. They worshiped the pagan god set them on fire. So, in other words, this misery comes because of these choices that are of misery. This slaughter leads to this slaughter. And we're not on the other side of eternity even yet. So, Gehenna is English, hell, right? But it's the Greek transliteration of Gehinnom, which Gehinnom then became, the meaning of it became a place of sacrifice, or a place of misery, right? A place of pain, a place of death. And here's another interesting thing. By the time Jesus comes around, nobody in their right mind was going to build a house there. So they made that the local dump where sewage would also go to. So it became a place of great stench, especially because they also had almost a nonstop burning there. They burned trash. And so you could look out, and there at the place of death, the place of historical misery, there is still smoke coming up. Where we burned our children, and people got burnt because they had made those choices. It's a place of stench, of eternal burning. So, is Jesus talking about the other side of eternity? Yes, but really by using a very real, specific, historical, vivid imagery. Does this make sense? So he didn't even make that word out of nothing. You know what we need? A place where everybody burns in hell. Ooh, let's just make that up. No, there's a historical there's a big backstory to it. And so when he used those words, he's saying that one place of misery is where you're headed, where you're living. So you can be, let's bring this together. Hell is not just on the other side of eternity. Whatever the other side of eternity is and will be, Jesus is using a very real historical events to give imagery to what will happen then. And what he's saying is, when he talks about a place of burning and fire and suffering, I don't know if he's literally trying to describe on the other side of eternity somebody's going to be on non-stop burning. Or is he using imagery of a place where they burned their children and then they got burnt there? And then currently, in the time of Jesus, there is the waste of humanity, right? Trash, that's non-stop burning. That imagery is the kind of reality you're headed towards. Here's why. Not because God is putting you there, is because that's the hell you've unleashed on yourself. Remember when he says to Jerusalem, you're not harming me, you're going to bring harm on yourself. You're going to burn because you burned your children. You're going to be piled on because you piled the bodies. It's the very thing that he said to Egypt, especially the 10th plague. You try to kill my firstborn, that's the punishment you're bringing on yourself. That's the 10th plague. God didn't pull that out of nothing. It had a very significance to that moment. You, Pharaoh, were trying to kill away my firstborn, Israel. So you chose the punishment coming. That is the hell you're creating, and you're going to live in it. Here would be another expression. It'd be like today, be like, the bed you made is the bed you're going to lie on. Welcome to the concept of hell. We unleash it. We've created it. We bring it upon ourselves. And the other side of eternity, whatever's going to be happening there, is going to be an eternal consequence to what we've unleashed here. Does that make sense? What are you hearing? Thoughts?
That this place is still burning today?
No, I'm not sure what they've done with it today. It's still there. I mean, it's a geography. You can't make that not be there. But I'm not sure what they have there. They probably cleaned it up. I doubt it's still burning.
Well,
doesn't make for good tourist attraction, right? And here's the very place. Stand closer, stand closer. Take pictures. This is the very place some of you will be going to. Take on the smell of rotting, burning things. Yeah, I mean, they probably cleaned it up. Yeah.
So when Jesus is describing hell, he's describing the pit, right? The endless fire and the worm doesn't die and darkness and all of that. How does that translate into judgment? We will be separated left and right.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be a place of darkness and weeping and gnashing of teeth?
Yes, because that's Jesus, but Jesus isn't crafting that idea out of just nothingness. He's using a moment in time and events of history to create that image in the minds of his audience.
So if he's creating the image, do we have a description of hell? I don't even know if I should ask this. Is there Jesus is using metaphorical language to reference something in the past.
To explain an eventual future. Yeah. It's almost the way prophecy works, or apocalyptic prophecy. All the things you read in the Revelation, Apocalipsis in Portuguese, apocalyptic language, that is Revelation, is is imagery being told here in the present, right? I'm speaking it to you, using images of our past to explain a very near future and with an eternal message to it as well. So even apocalyptic language isn't out of nothingness. Let's just create weird imagery, and here's a dragon, and which is next class. But that's what Jesus is doing. He's taking these real events that would have been deeply ingrained in the psyche of Israel, which was a place of misery, of very bad choices, of death, of slaughter, and of tears. Not just because we ended up killing our children, but because of that, many died. Bodies were piled there. As Babylon was besieging Jerusalem and burns Jerusalem to the ground. So just a place of great darkness, of great tears, and of great suffering. A legacy of it to Israel. And one that's coming again about 38 years after Jesus. But it will be by the Romans. So even Revelation is talking about what the Romans are going to do based on what the Babylonians and the Assyrians did, to also make an eternal reference of whatever hell is going to be like. So he's trying to use words that would make sense. That maybe today, if Jesus was standing here today, he would use imagery that would play into our psyche and our collective memory as Americans, so that we would feel what bad choices lead to in pain and suffering. Does that make sense? Now, if somebody's literally burning in hell on the other side of eternity, I don't know, and I don't know if it matters. It's going to be a place of great pain and sorrow because of choices made now.
Well, because God isn't there. That's the key.
That's right.
That's the hell is the absence of God's presence.
Yeah.
That's the scary part.
And the consequence of our choices. We, listen carefully, we unleash hell on ourselves and on others. And thus we lie in the mess, which doesn't just have eternal implications. It has some now. A lot of our own individual pain and suffering are just bad choices we made sometime in the past, or that others made for us, or that impacted us. So I want that to be clear, is that we unleash hell on ourselves and on others. Granted, often out of good intentions, or under the illusion of good choices. So Adam and Eve, it's not that we carry this original sin, but Adam and Eve unleashed hell back on earth. And we've been unleashing it on each other ever since, on ourselves and others ever since. I'm getting to the next lesson. So forget I said all that. Forget Adam and Eve. Act surprised next class. So, okay, we got 2 minutes. So what does this mean for us today, right? The words of Jeremiah, as well as the words of Jesus, were spoken originally to the people of Israel, right? God's people. And both are warning the people against unleashing a hell that they will eventually have to live themselves. And they did. And Jesus uses that imagery as a teaching lesson for all of his audience, us included. Whatever we're unleashing on ourselves, on each other, you have the world you create. Now, some, because of more power, whatever, have more of that mess. I own less of that mess. Let me say it differently with a modern application. In a world where we get to elect officials, we get what we elect. Elections have consequences. Historically, most of society has not had the opportunity or the privilege to vote. That's just been true. We do. And if the people we elect are the best America has to offer, may God have mercy on our souls. It just boggles my mind. And I'm not even promoting one party or the other.
So where are you going to run?
I don't want to burn in hell. Right? So, yeah, we got to just be careful. And I think Jesus... No, hold that thought. That's next class. Next class. Okay. Any last comment? Remember, Gehenna. Let's not create that mess ourselves. All right. Next class, we're going to talk about the serpent, how that connects from Genesis to Revelation. So, go ye and do not unleash hell on each other.